Right. All right. I want to welcome everyone to the Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. This is July 13th, 2025, and I'm my co-host, Kevin Bell, is out partying because of his birthday. So, so um, I hope he had fun. I can't remember if he's 24 or 25, but I think his birthday was yesterday, and he's up in Seattle area, visiting his cousin. And so, well, I'm joined here with Zach and John and Melissa, I think, or did Melissa drop
Nope,
out?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. So anyway, I today is just not a specific topic, and just kind of discussing some of the things happening in Douglas County, the Umpqua Valley, and things that may be happening elsewhere that have an impact on us. Um, First, the thing that is most interesting to me in the news from Douglas County this week is the weird situation that we have, if I guess that's a polite way to say, the situation we have with the Umpqua Public Transportation District, which is a public entity. And it's actually probably the newest public entity in Douglas County, was created a few years ago. And the fact that the carpetbagger from the northern part of the state, who is a kind of a MAGA political consultant, was in the news review about challenging the outcome of the recent special district election. And he and actually the chair of the board of the Umpqua Public Transportation District are uh, co-petitioners for an effort to eliminate mail-in ballots that we've had here in Oregon, shoot, for 20 years or more. And the What happened is there was a before he was actually even hired, I believe there was people who had to resign from the board. This was a year ago at the Public Transportation District. They had some problems with ODOT and some contract compliance, and there were some issues, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And the MAGA folks kind of won the prior special district election, and they're every 2 years, although the elections, the seats themselves are 4-year terms. And there was some resignations from the board member. The former director of the organization quit. So did the board members, and they ended up, what happened is the new board, the remaining board of the MAGA board, um, hire, filled the seats with their supporters. And um, just like the CEO that they then hired, this Ben, and I can't remember his last name. If anybody can, remembers his last name, and let me know. Um, is Was hired as a political consultant, and he actually had run for the state House of Representatives and lost, and is organizing this effort. Believes that mail-in ballots, I guess, are the reason he lost. And the way that the outcome of the election came, I could see where that would continue to foster his perception. But all of the stuff that we hear about mail-in ballots is a fallacy as far as it being corrupt, and there's all certainly in Oregon. And a year or so ago, I did some research on, the safety, and there was less than a handful, literally, of any complaints about fraudulent voting in Oregon. And some of them were about people who inadvertently voted twice. There was a couple incidents of that, and an incident or two when somebody voted for somebody else. But there was not, it's really probably, I think it was less than 10 people, not 10%, 10 people that this happened to. And so um, the the mail-in ballot is relatively safe. Not to say that there isn't flaws with it, but even recently in a dialogue on, I think, the News Review article promoting it, I was asking people, give the incidence of fraud. Where is it? Where is it? And they would say, oh, well, somebody said, oh, well, I had somebody stay here 8 years ago and they haven't lived here for 8 years. They don't live in the state and I still get their ballot. So my query was, well, did you report that to the clerk? And I don't know that they responded. But the other is, you didn't vote for them, did you? Because that would have been the fraud, right? Is if you had
Exactly.
voted for them. And the problem is they don't come up. And this is even with the team um, uh, of people who are trying to get this initiative. But the interesting thing is that our public transportation district was in serious financial trouble a year ago. And they ended up, uh, doing a contract with this guy. I think it was 130,000 a year. And but just last month, the board moved to cut routes and and increase the fee for the bus service. And, this is, this whole idea that the MAGA people are DOGE, and the folks who actually lost in this most recent election in May, that's being challenged now by the executive director. And that to me is a very odd situation that appears to be a conflict of interest when the hired paid staff person is challenging the election. Because what? He's afraid that the new board members are going to look at his contract and decide they're not going to go that way. And I don't know if it's a conflict under Oregon's ethics laws, which are very limited, very limited, and they apply to public employees as well as elected officials. But I think that somebody, and I might be that somebody that makes that inquiry to Oregon Ethics Commission, whether it really is copacetic for a person in his position to actually get involved in the politics and the outcome. Because there is some information that he was very active because he is a political consultant, but that's not what he was hired to do at our public transportation district, but was trying to facilitate who was going to be on the board. And it's not to say that executive directors, and I've been an executive director for a nonprofit, which is similar to, this public entity, but still it's a public entity. And I did recruit people to the board, but you tend to do that in the best interest of the organization and what you're doing. You're looking for people with certain skill sets. And when you're a nonprofit always begging for money, sometimes that is people who have access to people with money. Um, but this is really kind of unheard of in my experience, where a public entity CEO or paid administrator would actually be actively challenging the outcome of the election of his employer. You know, uh, Anybody else want to talk? Have any ideas, thoughts about this?
Well, it seems very in character for what gets called local politics, especially just in this last year. And I'm reminded, of course, of the harassment in the Roseburg City Council, which led to Kylie Rummel, former city councilor, stepping down. Um, and of course, the council selects their replacement. There's no re-election. It's more a matter of appointment. And so it seems to me very much the transportation district seems very much in line um, with that approach to local government. Like it almost has to be corrupt. Otherwise, we're not going to have a local government in the eyes of these officials.
One thing I'm reading here as I'm just looking this up, Betsy, is that I can't pronounce his last name, but it's spelled Edtl. Is it Edel or something like that?
Yeah.
Um, it says he is not requesting a recount. As the vote margin, 238 votes out of 10,102 cast is significantly outside the automatic recount threshold. Um, and it's also saying that he and the board have indicated they are unwilling to pay the Umpqua Public Transit District share of the election cost, which is $32,000 and change. Um, yeah,
Nor are they going to certify the election.
right.
So they're going to try to stop the people who were duly elected by the people of the district, which it probably includes all of us, right?
Yeah. Well, if you say they aren't going to certify it, do you mean the clerk?
No,
Isn't
no, that there is some process whereby the body itself certifies or recognizes it. So it
its
looks like they're
own?
going to try to maintain control
Of course they
of
are.
it. And so, yeah, the recount, yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because that had told I'd, you know, was thinking more about the stuff I was talking about, and forgot about that. But that is an extremely important thing.
Yeah.
What can be done at that point? And I don't know. I'm assuming that the people who are not being certified could take some action against the board. I wonder if the county clerk could take some action against the board.
Yeah.
And, that the interesting thing is, I think John mentioned before we launched, that, the good guy in this is, the county clerk, which we may not always agree with.
Yeah. Well, I'm also reading here that what you already spoke to, but a big part of the situation, like the background or the backstory and the underlying dispute is it's rooted in a larger dispute surrounding this guy's leadership, which has faced scrutiny due to his lack of prior transit experience and the agency's financial struggles and compliance issues that you also mentioned. And this is according to Jefferson Public Radio. But apparently, the current board, with its new majority, well, we'll see if this holds, is expected to address him, the CEO, at a meeting on July 19th, which that's would be Saturday, wouldn't it? I don't know if they are having a meeting on July 19th, but that's what it's telling me. There is an article in Jefferson Public Radio titled, "Can an America First Board Fix a Troubled..." Oh no, that's an old article. I apologize. Um, see if I can find the current one. Anyway, it's talking about that they are planning to address it. Um, and I did see another article that you brought it up. In Eugene, Springfield, man who wants to kill vote by mail challenges Roseburg transit election. Just because you lost, pal, that doesn't mean it's rigged. Um,
Well, and one could certainly make the argument from a political point, but to me, the interesting twist that I really question is whether a paid employee of the district has the right to, particularly in the position he is in, to do that. And you get into a little murky ground because I'm always telling people your employer can't tell you what you do on your own time and your own dime, right? And I would
yeah,
never really, but if you're in a certain position, because I've also been an executive director of a nonprofit here, and if you're really, even though you're not required, you have to, particularly I think in a small community, be very careful of, the impact of what you do doesn't adversely impact,
yeah,
the public service that you're working for. And so that's more of a, kind of a personal political situation. But I think that when you're looking at a guy who has a contract to do this, And then the argument can be made that he's concerned that he may not have a job. So he's going to attack the people who got elected. It just really, seems very, odd, even for Roseburg. And I agree with you, Zach. This is unfortunately maybe all part of that backdoor politics as usual that a lot of us, see sometimes the results of, and most times we are not aware of at all, because it's impacted, in the county commission regarding who is being picked for boards and commission, citizen boards and commission, and replacements, like with um, the counselor who left, how do you then pick those? Are they really picking the best person, or is it this cronyism, which, that's my opinion, is it really is, they don't care. The homeless commission in Roseburg is a perfect example. Me, some homeless people, some other advocates, none of us were picked for the homeless commission, and we applied, right? No. And still to this day, when they have replaced members, not once have they picked a homeless person. They don't solicit them. They don't want them. They don't want anybody who has an opinion and isn't going to just rubber stamp the mayor's, agenda for it, is what my opinion is.
And of course they'll say, "Oh, we have this homeless problem in Douglas County, but we don't know what to do about it. We've tried everything. Can somebody just give us an idea?"
Right.
Give me a break. People have been doing that for years.
The ideas that I espouse now, I started espousing in the 1980s. They really have not changed about how you address homelessness. One is you should have avoided it from the 1980s,
Mhm.
when it was much smaller problem than it is now, particularly in places like Roseburg. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say from the perspective of an historian too, that it's a centuries long problem as well. Take it
Yeah.
back to England in the 17th century, and there are poor houseless people who are trying to claim land for themselves, and the government slaps them down and says no, even though they are, tilling soil on common land, building their own homes, trying to build a life of dignity and moral integrity for themselves. The state comes in and says, no, you can't do that. We're going to leave you in a situation where you can only beg for charity. That's it. No dignity for you. So it is an ongoing problem that is not just new. But on the
Right. Yeah.
on the on the case with the Edel at the transportation district, something that stands out to me in the News Review article in which he's quoted, that came out recently. He explicitly says they want me out, in response to the board election in May. Um, and it's funny to say they want me out, as though he is speaking to an audience of certain followers, as though he were an elected official. It's
That's
uh,
right.
acting like he is acting as though he is a demagogue, as somebody who is supported by the masses of people, despite not actually being in an elected office. And it's what's, I think, especially dangerous about this is it is flipping the role of the elected official and the hired consultant or CEO, in that he is reframing the elected officials here as the enemy, and himself, who has no direct responsibility to the public, as the hero.
I have
That
a
I think
question.
is designed to change the way that people who are maybe inclined to sympathize with them think about the electoral process itself. I don't think it's a mistake that I think it was like a couple days ago. Was it the governor of Missouri, I believe, made some statement about the United States, of course, not being a direct democracy. We're a republic of elected officials, and direct democracy is nothing but mob rule.
Senator Lee from Utah has said that exact same thing, that
Might have been
rank democracy is mob rule. But I have a question. I think you bring up some very good points, Zach. Before Michaela Hammerson hired this guy, was there a CEO of the board? Did that position exist?
Yes, they're our executive director, whatever they called them, I think originally they were called an executive director, but yes, and then she quit under some pressure last summer. And but there was uh
It was really his lack
oh,
of qualifications, the fact that he was a
right.
political consultant and it had nothing to do with transportation.
That's right. No experience whatsoever in transportation. Granted, it's hard to recruit people with such specific qualifications to a rural area like Douglas County, right? That
Yeah,
may be true. But there are people who have lateral skills, right?
yeah, yep,
That could come in. And the other thing is that, when you were mentioning Zach, the interesting thing to me is I have a particular issue with our current city manager in the city of Roseburg. And they were not a trained city manager. Okay, they were not a trained public administrator. Um, and there's also a problem with, I believe, the Sutherland city manager. And what you described of this guy is kind of what, ding in my brain. This is the problem I have with the city manager. That the city manager in Roseburg, some of the city councilors a year ago almost wanted to have a discussion about firing her because of the way that she kind of, does business in a way that they don't feel comfortable with as city councilors. But she got all these people in the community, her staff and other people from other organizations, some of whom do business with the city, to come and say how wonderful she is before even the real discussion started to come up. And so that kind of sidelined that. And then there was efforts by the city, at least one city councilor to replace, and he lost his seat, one of the city councilors who was raising the questions about whether the city manager was doing their job. About 10, 15 years ago, I took a class on public policy and local government. And so I interviewed then the Sutherland city manager, not the same one, who was a professionally trained city manager, as an interview about what they're taught, and what he saw their role as. And he was very clear that their role is supposed to be an objective advisor. They're supposed to be the researchers. They're supposed to ensure that that decision makers have all sides of, pros and cons. Not that they don't have opinions, because you do hire them for that expertise, but they are supposed to be objective. And I don't see that with the Roseburg city manager. I don't see it with, the Sutherland city manager. And you pointed out, the CEO, executive director, whatever he is now, I don't see that with him either. Right. And because of that statement, it's very clear he doesn't understand the role of a public servant. And that's
yeah.
really, maybe the bottom line here, that they are public servants and they are not there for their own agenda.
And as Zach said, he's not elected. And
Right.
yeah, and then starting this anti-vote by mail initiative. Um, yes, seems like, I don't know, just has an ick factor to it. Um, but I do want to talk about what we're trying to do. I mean, at some point, in response to that movement, to end vote by mail.
Yeah, we'll
And
get there, but Zach
yeah,
had brought up, discussion about the bigger issue of transportation. So not
yeah,
only do we have this shit show in Douglas County regarding our public transportation, which is a very small public transportation system, right? Not that old. It was always underfunded, but state level, Zach, you want to, you know,
Sure. So I've just caught up on reading on this. So we are presently in Oregon, throughout the state of Oregon, facing, of course, massive cuts to the Oregon Department of Transportation. The estimate that I recently saw was something like 10% of the department's budget is being slashed. To my understanding, it's 10% of the budget or 10% of staff. But in certain regions like our own, almost the entirety of certain sections are being cut. Uh, I was reading an article this morning in the Salem Statesman Journal, who interviewed Dan Metz, who uh, is a longtime Douglas County resident, was a manager of the High Cascades section that ODOT covers, which is it includes Highway 138, Highway 230, and Highway 62, which will be if you're in Roseburg, it's Diamond Lake. It's the extension of Diamond Lake Boulevard out past Glide and into the Umpqua National Forest, all the way out to the Diamond Lake and Crater Lake areas. 230 and 62 extend from that south and connect to Medford and Klamath Falls. And as Dan makes clear in this interview, this section in the Cascades sees a lot of snow, especially this last year. And without the 24/7 crews that ODOT supports that are out there in the snowy season, those roads could very easily be closed down. And that would cut off bus routes for school kids. It cuts off access to and from Crater Lake, Diamond Lake area. There are a bunch of people, of course, who live along that whole stretch and rely on the roads like 138 being accessible. And I grew up between Roseburg and Glide, and I know that even the section of Highway 138 between Roseburg and Glide, which is only a fraction of that whole stretch of road, has had some serious um, inclement weather that has made the road very dangerous to drive on. And that is even considering that ODOT was there to de-ice and clear snow. So we're facing effectively a loss of that and potential impassable roads come wintertime. Might be unpredictable times. And I mean, that's going to be compounded by the fact that National Weather Services are also seeing cuts as of late. But Dan Metz said in this article also that in they're losing in the High Cascades section the majority of their staff. I believe he said something like, was it 15 or so people in the summer times, 20 to 22 people on the staff in the winter, and all but 5 are being cut. So his last day on the job is the 31st of this month. I think it's not just a huge loss, but people rely on ODOT being there, and beyond this being a state agency, I think it's easy for many of us to think of the Oregon Department of Transportation as being a an office of unelected bureaucrats who are managing affairs, or using up our tax dollars. And these are our neighbors who are working for these departments. These are not people who are just coming from Salem, but people who've even grown up in Douglas County and who care deeply about taking care of this county and the people in it. Um, so there's a massive loss, but I think that considering the compounding effects of climate crisis, which will be bringing worse storms in the winter times, as well as the more intense heat waves in the summer times. Um, this might be pretty devastating for folks out in East County.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I
Well,
don't
and
think
if I
there's any,
remember, go
oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I'm,
And I remember that one of the things that, was put on the news that the governor said is that that's when we're going to see the impact, that is going to be wintertime is, what happens. So, they're already predicting this. And Melissa, you mentioned something about a lobbying day, but I also remember when they had their, dog and pony show, or thought they were going to, at their town hall. If I remember correctly, this was
yeah,
part of what David Brock Smith was bragging that
yes,
they were gonna be able to stop
yeah, that's
this,
exactly right. And
bill,
well, yep, and it was the transportation bill, as I remember it, that he was bragging that he was going to kill. And so when we were lobbying for that package, and it was very clear, um, that it wasn't going to get a single Republican vote. And now we're seeing what that obstruction looks like. And unfortunately, there are, as Zach pointed out, a lot of people in very rural Douglas County who are going to pay a really high price, um, so that David Brock Smith could, I don't know what, score some political points.
Mhm. Well,
yeah.
I think beyond just scoring political points, and there were debates happening in the state legislature. I know Mark Meek of the Gladstone area, who works in the legislature. Um, he's a Democrat, and he was opposed to the bill that was put forward that would, in theory, provide the funding for the Department of Transportation with changing in taxes, including certain tax hikes. He was perhaps wildly claiming that this kind of legislation would open the door quietly for toll roads in Oregon. So I think that this panic was easily created around that bill. Now I don't think that that's necessarily founded, but um, the the changing in the gas tax and shifting it toward a by mile tax that includes that effectively includes electric vehicles in the equation. That seemed to be one of the key features of this that was highly controversial. Um, and it does seem controversial. That is quite a shift in how transportation is taxed in the state of Oregon. But at the end of the day, people have relied on this department, and um, uh, without making a judgment on the bill that failed in the legislature, the effects of this are far more concerning.
I will add that we did meet with, and on the day we were there was when the final package was dropped. So it hadn't really been seen by many people when we were talking with them. But
Mhm.
we met with a Democratic state senator, and he was on the fence, or was going to be a no because the bill didn't go far enough in terms of funding. And so, yeah, I guess I can't place all the blame on David Brock Smith, but or the Republicans, but obviously something needed to get passed um, to fund ODOT, um, to at least keep it where it is now. And they did not make that happen. And a lot of really people, and like I said, in rural counties are pay a heavy price for their inaction, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
Well,
we have a super majority, and the Democrats have a super majority, so it has to have been the Democrats that helped the failure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Do we know what all what all what all was involved in the tax increases on this bill besides the gas tax? Because the Republicans said it was the largest tax increase in the state history. Of course, they said that about Measure 118 as well. So they always it did a raise any other taxes besides the gas tax.
yes, I have an article from Oregon Public Broadcasting up with some information. Um, let's see. So the uh, bill includes raising the state's 40% gallon tax by 12 cents beginning next year. Let's see, scrapping a transfer tax. Sorry. Lawmakers propose raising an existing tax for the privilege, quote unquote, of selling cars in the state from 0.5% to 2.25%, which is a big jump. And they do away with a provision in the old bill that would have ensured the state's gas tax would rise with inflation. The key thing that I found in here was the shift from the gas tax to a broader miles-based tax. So OPB writes the version of HB 2025 that was headed to the House floor uh, included more frequent audits of the Oregon Department of Transportation, a quote road usage charge unquote designed to wean Oregon off the gas tax by charging drivers of electric vehicles and highly fuel efficient vehicles a fee based on miles they drive, and increasing a tax dedicated to transit service that Oregon workers pay from their paychecks from 0.1% to 0.3%. So those seem to be the key things to me. The one that really stood out to me was the shift from the gas tax to the fee on miles driven.
Well, that transit tax, that's what pays for our Umpqua board there,
Mhm.
our Umpqua Transportation Board. So that's ironic. They're all tied in there.
Well, and one of the things when, we think about taxes that, as a progressive leftist, I am not opposed to scrutinizing how government departments spend our money and all looking at that analysis. But I am also very uncomfortable when the only consideration is the money part, when they don't look at what are you getting for the money, because that's really a very capitalist, mindset, right?
Right.
That it's all about the in and out of cash. And and we have to get away from falling into that trap of accepting that as the main point. Public service, the value that we have and get from that needs to be considered in the equation. And I think it's probably the primary thing, at least from my perspective, that needs to be in the equation. So when they were not giving, they were giving benefits for electric vehicles, the thought was, well, they're going to help get, fossil fuel off the road, right? So if that's true, that makes some sense to me.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that, Betsy, that I don't think it was all about the money for them, because one thing that Brock Smith said was he wasn't going to support anything because of Kotek's PLA, and I didn't know what that was, so I had to look it up. And the PLA is what the governor has taken. It's called project labor agreements, and so she signed the executive order in December of last year, mandating that these project labor agreements are used for most state-funded public improvement projects, where on-site labor constitutes at least 15% of the total construction cost. So it has things that require contractors and subcontractors to negotiate or become party to these labor agreements with the trade unions, effectively ensuring union participation in major state construction projects. And that struck me that he was vehemently opposed to that.
Yeah, because he's
Uh,
anti-worker. I mean, this
yeah,
is really what that is. Those agreements I happen to agree with because they use them in federal building grant projects for years and all that. That anybody who's building this stuff on behalf of the rest of us and operates it deserves a living wage. They
yeah,
deserve, a family living wage. And so really they're anti-worker. And hopefully the voters of Douglas County start to realize this, not only of Brock Smith, but our House representatives who in Douglas County that represent every portion of Douglas County are also Republicans who, if I remember correctly, all of them at one, were at that town hall as well and were on board with this. So this
yeah,
ideology is anti-worker, pro-capitalist,
yeah,
private investment, let them make the best money. And that's one of the things I think we need to hammer home. And I am not an expert on transportation funding, so all of you probably know a lot more about it than
no,
I do. I
I
look at the outcome of it, right? When I'm looking at the transit district, I want the money spent wisely. But, my mother used to say, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. She wasn't the only
yeah,
one. But that's the idea that I see in this, oh, we're only going to give this amount of money, right? Our transportation district here should have a lot more routes. Well, people say, well, we don't have the money. We have to start asking, why don't we have the money? We don't
yeah,
make it a priority to have the money. We could move quickly and could have moved in, 20 years ago, far away from fossil fuel. If the
yeah,
criteria was doing what's in best interest of the community as opposed to worrying about whether your capitalist friend's going to make a dime.
But this, I think, is a very it's a problem of even our basic roots, the foundations of our communities in Oregon that we even take for granted. Like here in Douglas County, it's easy to think of the building of the railroad, the extension of the railroad, the Oregon California Railroad, from the north, stopping at Roseburg for about 10 years, extending on south, as being how this community or the communities in Douglas County and south of us were even made possible. Roseburg became understood as this booming town where the commodities on the trains and the people on the trains would hop onto the stagecoaches and go further south. It became something of a kind of commercial hub. But from the get-go in that period, this is late 19th century, already we can find this in historical accounts. I know Stephen Dow Beckham's account, history professor, grew up in Coos Bay, wrote a great history of Douglas County, including economic history. One thing that he points out in his text on Douglas County's history is that at that period when Roseburg was at its most booming, when it became a real hub of activity with the railroad, those who were seeing the returns from that economic activity were by and large a handful of people who were passing money around, more or less, your merchants and your so-called business owners, industrialists. And over the course of like 10 years, this would have been 1870s, 1880s, the division of the haves and have-nots in the Roseburg area really became clear. Those who were owning property, those who owned lands, who were only a handful of the population, acquired a far greater portion of available lands in the area, and the majority of the population had quite little. And as a result, a lot of those people moved elsewhere. They couldn't manage to continue to live here. So this division between, rich and poor, the haves and have-nots, your so-called industrial business owners, bosses, and workers, that division has been developing since the beginning of our community's foundation. And we can't simply take, the glory of the railroad as given. This is the history of the state of Oregon. It is built on a capitalistic economy.
Well, isn't that true also of the ONC lands? I remember reading, some years ago about, how that all, and the people basically had them stolen, the railroad companies, right? Took all the land up on the ONC land for people who were given it, you know, um, for theoretically for their own prosperity, right? To be able to build their own prosperity. But a lot of that underhanded dealing was happening so they could gain access to those lands to build railroad. So you're right. I mean, and that's probably true of all of America that is created, once the Europeans landed here, no matter what they were, even before capitalism was, called capitalism, that still was probably, but the problem is we look at money as being the end all. And I think it goes back to that argument that community, and hopefully that shift is changing, not just on this transportation issue, but a variety of things.
Mm.
Um,
But I think it's more helpful to consider it in terms of wealth, of the well-being of the community, the
yeah.
ability of the people in our community, the resources that we have, natural and artificial resources. Those things are what get extracted and appear as money most of the time. I think my real challenge when we're thinking about the taxation problem, why is there no money, especially here in Douglas County? Why do we have so little, or seem to have so little? I think it would behoove us to take a long, hard look at how our own community began and was developed, and to reconsider what, the booming times of Douglas County really meant. Like I would say, Kenneth Ford, the Ford family, for example, are hailed as incredibly important people, wonderful philanthropists, who brought so many jobs to the people of Douglas County. Well, at the same time as they're bringing jobs, so it is said, they're also extracting. They take advantage of people's labor, and a lot of the wealth that is generated in in largely ecological destruction, clear cutting of forests. A lot of that wealth that is generated is not not in the hands of the people of Douglas County.
Nor does it get reinvested in the community.
Well, now even some more so that the Roseburg Forest Parks particularly, has moved its headquarters out of Douglas County. But I would tell you, like in the 1990s, this is a side note, that the Ford Foundation didn't have that big building on Stewart Parkway until then. They were actually being looked at for failing to give away the money under their foundation. And I know that because I was an executive director of a nonprofit that actually got money from the Ford, benefited from them being held accountable. So they use these tax shelters for, theoretically magnanimous reasons, but then they don't really want to let go of the money, right? They still want to hold it, and then they control it. And the argument is they actually that isn't even necessarily helpful, because they then still are, creating the social structure by even to what nonprofits, they're willing to give that money to. So yeah, and I think that we do have to look at it in that bigger picture. And I think the average citizen, if they want to know why we economically are so, in the toilet, in Douglas County, which we have the third worst economy in the entire state. And so I think that, that is something that people who want to hold on to this ideology of, the great timber world that they lived in, was a fallacy even when it existed, right? Even when money was there. It wasn't for all. We had a whole lot of poverty, even when all the mills were running. you know, it's not necessarily the solution. So
Mhm.
we're, at 7 o'clock, 7:02, and Melissa, you wanna segue into what you wanna talk about?
Yeah, I'll just
Indivisible.
I'll just speak very briefly about it. We are having an event on Thursday night or evening at 6 p.m. at the usual place, which is on Garden Valley Boulevard in front of the Bureau of Land Management. And this is a national event, and it's taking place on July 17th, which is obviously, I said Thursday. I think I said that because it marks the 5th anniversary of the passing of Congressman John Lewis. And so, kind of the theme is good trouble lives on. And what our chapter is really focusing on is opposing that Senate Bill 210, which we know is to end vote by mail. And that's obviously a calculated attack on voter access. It's just another voter suppression tactic. So we're going to be out really promoting, the continuation of vote by mail. And there's still the existence of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which there's no chance in hell it's going to get passed under this Congress. But we still want to remind people, that it exists. And also, we're also going to be doing food drive for food products, hygiene products, sunscreen, toothpaste, toothbrushes, anything for, it'll be for, I think we're splitting the donations. I'm not entirely sure between the food bank and then the new Douglas County Food and Resource Coalition. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the plan. So it's basically come out in support of vote by mail and voter rights. And also, if you can, bring something to donate to people who may be food insecure or are unhoused. And that'll be 6 p.m. Thursday. It should be about an hour.
When I load this, I will put that in the description below on the YouTube channel, where it is. I'll put the information in there. And speaking of the resistance, there's a lot of, angst going on about protests, 1 hour protest being the only thing that seems to be happening. For one, is challenging what is happening in the government happens in many ways, right? So I'm not against, protest and doing it. But a few months ago, probably more than a few now, I had, agreed to help organize a resistance group that would talk about doing stuff more. There were some signups, but people really, didn't participate. But I've had people contact me more recently about wanting to do more about what is happening on a national level, and very concerned about the train wreck that is heading our way,
Mhm.
that. And so there will also be a contact information about how to sign up for that resistance effort, to kind of plan things. Somebody talked to me about, trying to get the Democrat elected, because that's who our Congress people are here from Douglas County,
Yeah,
and Senator, our Democrats, is to get them to up their game, right?
yeah,
And quit playing this nice, politically correct, politician statesman, because that's long gone out the window. And maybe, drop a petition to send to our senators and representatives, well, at least the Democratic one,
yeah,
and demanding, that they actually start doing stuff much more assertively or aggressively. As Because I agree that they can probably do that, but there's also other things, boycotting, the
yeah,
economic boycott. I think we really, there's two economic powers we have: where we make our money, and where all of us can really control it even more is where we spend our money.
yeah,
And so I think that participating, and not just doing it silently, but overtly participating, and let the people know. So one of the things that will be, what I'm going to be developing is a list of, garnering this information from all these people that are tracking all these corporations, and putting a list out for those that are here in Douglas County. And when we talk about boycott, you see that I put up, my boycott sign, and the other
yeah,
side of it is Bigfoot. you
yeah,
know those Teamsters are still out there demonstrating. This is kind of in a limbo because it's through the National Labor Relations Board. But these people really need their help. It would be really good if the members of the community actually showed up on Highway 99, between where Pepsi Road and 99 meet in, between Green and Winston. I think the address is in Winston. But Bigfoot Beverages is on Pepsi Road because it's a Pepsi distributor and always has been. And those people could really use the boost of moral support. I mean, sometimes I
yeah,
see two people there under their under
yeah.
their blue
And
awning. So
especially because they're in a lockout now. Like they
yes,
gave
yes,
in to
right.
Bigfoot and said, "Okay, fine, we'll take your crappy contract." And Bigfoot was like, "Too bad," and won't let him back to work. So I mean, it's a really
Well,
bad place for them.
Well, and if all the communities, because Bigfoot isn't so big that it could, Bigfoot isn't big enough to not succumb to economic pressure. They
Yeah,
have Lane County, our county, Coos County, even over
yeah,
in Bend, there's a distributor, but I was told they're not unionized. But over in Florence, I believe. So there's really only a handful of these distribution sites that if people really stop buying the products, which Pepsi is number one,
yeah,
that is the main, but there's a whole slew of beverages and even snacks that they distribute. If they actually could put pressure on the businesses who are selling them, right? Because they
y-
have another option for that junk food as far as, a
yeah,
distributor, because there is a Coke distributor. Um, so that could actually help these Teamsters a whole lot if the rest of us could join in that economic boycott of these products and make an issue of it. Like I said, not just do it, but encourage other people to do it and start talking about how important it is to support workers that are fighting for living wage jobs and including retirement benefits.
Yeah, and especially with Bigfoot, because there are several Oregon companies who use them. Ninkasi Brewing,
Yes,
um,
yeah,
Kombucha out of Bend, Pelican Brewing. I
yeah,
mean,
I was
if
gonna
we
say,
start to like really, I mean, postcards, whatever, phone calls, and really do targeted boycotts, even to just those three companies, they
yes,
they would take a hit. Um, and maybe that would they would bring the union back to the table or something. But I mean, I think especially for these Oregon companies, we need to say you are you're kicking Oregon workers off the job. You're helping to bust a union, and that's not acceptable.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
Who's gonna
those
do it?
three. And I'll look, well, I, God, Lord, I've been talking about it forever. I am so burned out right now that I'm trying to take a break. But I know the Indivisible, we've talked about it, and it's just a matter of be, because there's so, it's such a shit show that we're in right now, of getting it done. But I will
Yeah,
reach out to people and say, let's just choose these three. And if we find others in Oregon, great, but I know those three offhand. And say, let's write, call, and boycott. And
yeah,
even if we have to demonstrate in front of, I can, I bet I could get people in Eugene to go to Ninkasi and protest and say, why are you supporting union busting? Um, and so maybe I'll try and reach out to some of my friends in Eugene about that. I don't really know anyone in Bend, but that's where Kombucha, which I used to buy, and I've been boycotting it, for months and months now. Won't buy it. Um, and then I know Pelican Brewing is popular too.
yeah.
So
It's actually the beer that my husband drank. I mean, we don't drink it much, so even if he doesn't drink it, it's probably
yeah,
not an economic hardship for him. But that is a brand that we quit buying because of this strike.
yeah,
Um, and there actually a couple months ago, I did start a Facebook group about supporting the Bigfoot strikers. So I'll put information about that too, and maybe start
yeah,
organizing. And there's some folks that are in that group kind of waiting to, what are we going to do? And I think this is a good idea. But I also think the public demonstration for
yeah,
the workers,
yeah,
if we get enough people, a few of us went out there, actually more than a month ago now, but there was only a few of us. But I think we really
yeah. I
need,
went out
you
with
know,
a few people.
to get more people there for the morale of the workers as well as showing the community support. It would be
Yeah,
important. So maybe in that group we can talk about how to organize a big enough demonstration on um for an hour out there.
yeah, that'd be great.
So any last comments from anybody?
Well,
Just think.
I just,
Oh, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
this regarding this Oregon or this Umpqua transportation fiasco, just a little bit of trivia for you. Years ago, when we were in the tree planting business, we gave a uh, we 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 gave a job to Todd Bond. I guess because he got the job, he decided to hang around Douglas County. So
So we blame you. So
you can
so we
blame me,
know
yeah.
How could
we
you
know
do
who to
this to
blame.
So,
John? Why?
Well,
Yeah,
Betsy,
I have a friend that lives out in Glide, and that's the reason we ended up in Glide. I knew her. We were friends since we were teenagers, and I say when people, if they don't like me, I said, "Here, you can blame her. It's her fault I'm here." So,
well,
are we done?
before we leave, I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing this. I know you've been under the weather, um, and Kevin is off enjoying his birthday. That's great.
Good for him.
But thank you for doing this, even though I know you don't feel great. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me, because I
Yeah,
wouldn't have done it if you guys hadn't shown up. So, That's a reality.
Good.
Solidarity forever in sickness and in health.
Yeah, there you go.
Amen. I do. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
See you
Okay,
later.
we'll see ya.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.